Listen, who's on? Oh, Yehuda's on. Okay, I'm starting already because, as I said, we've got a lot to cover. You can all take your time. So yeah, we have to have a shiur on Shabbos as well, but okay, we'll see. Yeah, we'll see. It depends how much we manage to cover. We're up to Daf Kuf Mem Ches Amud Beis, 3 lines from the wide lines. The Mishnah tells us that if a person runs out of wine on Shabbos, he's allowed to go down to his neighbor and say to him, "Can I have a bottle of wine?" As if you remember, the Mishnah tells us the difference between saying Hash'olah and Halvah. One of them is a much more an expression of lending, which is long-term, which a person may write down. One is borrowing, which is for much shorter terms, a person won't write down. But you are allowed to get a bottle of wine. So the Gemara says like this: alone on Yom Tov. You can never demand it back. That means you can't ever take the person in turn. Let's say I go to Torah and say to him, I've run out of wine, and he lends me a bottle of wine. He can never take me to basin to get a bottle of wine. I owe it to him, and I have to pay it. But he can never take me to basin for it. We can't. He can take me to basin. Why? If we allow that he can be tivaed, then what will happen is they'll come to write it. Man closing the doors, noise coming from. Then what will happen is if we allow a person to be tivaed and based in, so then he'll want to write it down in order to remember it. So therefore we obviously can't be tivaed. Thank you. Again, Rav Yosef says we can't be tivaed, but if we allow people to be tivaed, the more will happen is he will come to write it down. If we tell people that if you lend me the bottle of wine, I owe it, you'll never be able to get it off in based in, what will happen? You won't want to lend it to me. If you won't want to lend it to me, so what will happen is I won't have the wine. So then I'll lose my Simchas Yom Tov. So one man says, better we don't let you write it down. We don't let you be Tivayet in case you might come to write it down. The other man says, we let you be Tivayet in case otherwise you won't give it, and then you'll end up not lending, and then you run out, it won't be the same Simchas Yom Tov. And we actually pass that you're allowed to be Tivayet. So if let's say that your neighbor comes to you on Yom Tov, says, I run out of sugar, I run out of lemonade, whatever it may be, you can lend it, and then after Yom Tov, you can take them to base. So now, Mishnah says, I will try to prove one way or the other. If he doesn't trust, let's say Tali doesn't trust me, I can leave my coat by him, and then after Yom Tov, he can use it to get his wine. That you can't be too if you say that he can't take me to Basin, so that's why he needs the coat, to make sure that he gets his wine. But again, after Shabbos, you'll make a calculation exactly how much I owe, because the code might be worth more, so therefore you have to work it out. Why should he ask me for his code? Let's say he doesn't trust me. What does he care? All he needs to do is after Yom Tov, after Shabbos, take me to Beis Din. And it's more, now can't be bothered with an Torah with the Dayanim. So therefore, you've got no right from the Mishnah. The fact that the Mishnah says that I should leave my coat there as a collateral for the bottle of wine doesn't mean that without it, you can't claim. Maybe even without the bottle of wine, you can claim. The reason the Mishnah advises on that course of action is because otherwise, people will be reluctant to lend a bottle of wine because imagine what the tirchet is to go to Basin. But you've got no right that you can't be Tiveh. Most of it about Ovid. Got a very interesting scenario over here like this. Give you a background. In the olden days, people didn't have freezers. And it was very, very common when you shechted a cow to split it. And in fact, you'd actually decide before all the people together come to the sheikh. All of us come to the sheikh together and say, please shecht for us a cow. I'll take the leg, you take the back, you'll take the stomach. What? Yes, very much like Pesach. We'll see. Yeah. And what happened was like this. Rosh Hashanah is the first day of Tishri. In the olden days, there were always been Kaddish the Chodesh by Eidim. So every time it came to the 30th of Elul, we could not necessarily be sure if it's going to be Rosh Hashanah or not. Some years it was, some years it wasn't. So they were masakin that every single year you have 2 days Rosh Hashanah. The 30th of Elul and the first day of Tishrei is always Rosh Hashanah. If the Adam came in the end and Basin said that Mekudesh HaChodesh, so that day, the first day was really Rosh Hashanah, the second day was only Midrabanan. If Adam never came the first day, they only came on the second day. So then what would happen is it was only Drabanan on the first day, not the second day. That's what they used to do because it was impossible for anybody to know when is Rosh Hashanah going to be. Now, the last day of Shemitah, all loans are cancelled. Let's say I borrow from you the day before Rosh Hashanah, on the last day of Shemitah, and I borrow from you £100. Comes Rosh Hashanah, let's say you never wrote a puzzle or anything, you can't claim it. That's it, you've lost your £100. Can you imagine such a thing? I borrow from you money, you'll never get it back. Now, I'm going to just give a bit more background. The Chatchina, I'm supposed to offer you the money, and what you're supposed to say is, Meshamet ani, that I relinquish it. And if I say, Afal Pikin, I want to give it to you, then what happens is I have to give it to you. Okay. So what happened was like this. A group of people came to the butcher on Rosh Hashanah, and they said to him, we want to share a cow, and we'll all pay you. I'll pay 10, you'll pay 10, everybody will pay £10, and that way we'll cover the cow. And then what happened was, there's no prosper, and this is the last day of the year of Shemitah. Comes the next day, we all potter. You have the all potter. Now, are we all potter? So it depends. If the first day of Rosh Hashanah, because you used to go on Rosh Hashanah to go, you can't shech before Rosh Hashanah because the meat would go bad. You go on Rosh Hashanah. If the first day of Rosh Hashanah was really the 30th of Elul, so then indeed Shemitah applied and it's all gone. The loan is finished because 30th day of Elul was the last day of the previous year, and now Rosh Hashanah came and the loan is cancelled. If the first day of Rosh Hashanah was really the new year, so when did the loan occur? The first day of the next year. So then there's no Shemitah. Shemitah is only in the year of Shemitah. Is it clear? If it's not clear, it's Kedai to stop me already now. No, they came to on Yom Tov. How can they pay him? They can't pay him on Yom Tov. They came to him on Yom Tov. We'll go to the Sheikh on Yom Tov and say, can we shech the cow between us? So the Gemara says like this. If that day of Rosh Hashanah was the 30th of Elul, Meshamet, he's lost the loan, and the Sheikh gets nothing. If not, there's no Shemitah. Says the Gemara, if you say that you can't demand it, the halacha is Shemitah only applies to loans that can be demanded. If it can't be demanded, then there's no Shemitah. If you say that this loan can't be Meshamet, so then there's no Shemitah. It means if this loan can't be demanded, it's not a real loan. If it's not a real loan, what does Shemitah apply over here? It's just a matter of, do I trust you that even though you can't force me in Basin, that you'll give me back the money? So Moses says, no, Shani also is going to the Chaylu. In the end of the day, when we split the cow, it was Rosh Hashanah. But the Mafreya, afterwards we found out that it wasn't really Rosh Hashanah, it was actually the 30th day of Elul. So then everybody agrees it's a real loan. Because at the time when we split the cow, it wasn't actually Rosh Hashanah at all, it was the last day of the previous year. So then everybody agrees the loan can be split, can be nitzbah. Toshma is safer from the end. Imlav, if not, inim meshamet. That means if the last day that means if the first day of Rosh Hashanah was not the 30th of Elul, but rather what was it? The first day of Rosh Hashanah. There's no Shemitah. Why is there no Shemitah? Like we explained. Because by the time we split the cow, it's actually the next year. If it's already next year, there's no Shemitah. If I can do two days, that's what the Mishnah is telling us, a special Chiddush. There's no Shemitah, and we can claim it. But what difference does it make it in the Meshamet? Either way, you're not going to be able to claim it back. According to the Mandama, that any loan which is done on Yom Tov, you can never claim again. What difference does it make that day happened to be Rosh Hashanah when we split the cow, and therefore Shemitah took place, and therefore there was no Shemitah? We don't care if there's Shemitah or no Shemitah. Since the cow was split on Rosh Hashanah, so therefore nobody can claim anything. Moses says, no, that if it wouldn't have been for Rosh Hashanah, if not for the fact of Shemitah, you'd have to give it to him, because we said before, even if coming to that basin, you still should give it to him. Now the Shemitah you can't. You don't need to give it to him. It says, is that true? That when the Shemitah you don't have to offer it? Of course you have to offer it. So it says that. That means, according to the Mandama, that alone of Yom Tov, you can never claim afterwards. The whole nafkamina as to whether it's Rosh Hashanah or not Rosh Hashanah is not whether you can claim it. Whatever happens, you will not be able to claim this loan. Why? Because it's a loan on Yom Tov. A loan on Yom Tov can never be claimed. The whole nafkamina would be like this. If it's Shemitah, so then what happens is, when I offer to pay back, you have to say to me, I'm a shamet, I relinquish it. And if I say, nevertheless, I want to pay you, which is the correct thing the Gemara says, you can accept it. If it's not Shemitah year, or let's say, for example, the first day was already Rosh Hashanah and not the last day of Elul, so therefore Shemitah didn't apply in that particular case, then when I offer it to you, you don't need to say I relinquish it. On the contrary, I owe it to you, I'm mechuyev to give it to you. The Gemara says that is the difference. You're back alone after Shvis. If he says, nevertheless, I want to pay to Kabul Memenu Mishmushanema, Dvar Hashmita. Dvar Hashmita, the simple translation is the matter of Shmita. But we can also darshan Dvar Hashmita, Dibur of Shmita. That Shmita requires one to make a certain speech. What is the speech? That I relinquish the loan. Now the Gemara goes back. So what does a person do if I want to get a bottle of wine and I don't want the person what? So the Gemara gives two options. Rav Avya Shochen Mashkona, Rav Avya on Yom Tov would always take a mashta. Why? He was concerned that he won't get the bottle of wine back. Rabba Ba'ula Mariam Avume, he would do a trick. He would do a trick. What would he do? So the Meforsh got different explanations. One explanation is Rashi, that what would happen is like this. Let's say Tony gave me his bottle of wine. Comes after Yom Tov, and he says we can have the bottle of wine. I say, look, go to Basin. And according to the man Domar, that you can't go to Basin. What would you do? So what he would do is he'd say to me, okay, forget it. A few days later, he would come and say, can I borrow a hammer? Say, yeah, you can have the hammer. And then I would say, can I have my hammer back? He'd say, no, only when you give back the bottle of wine. So that way, he would get, that was one of the tricks they used to use to make sure to get it back. Or another option is that he would say, can I borrow money from you and not pay the money back? That was another trick they used to use. They would find a way to get their thing back, even though you come into that. The Mishnah carries on by telling us on Erev Pesach. So again, Erev Pesach, there's a mitzvah being Korban Pesach. And what happened was, let's say I forgot to separate a Korban Pesach. So I go to a shepherd, I say to him, can I have your Korban Pesach? Can I have a sheep? He says, certainly, but he's scared I won't pay him. So then I leave my coat by him, and then after Yom Tov, I have to pay him for the sheep. You're allowed to be makdish your Korban Pesach on Shabbos, or your Korban Chagig on Yom Tov. Normally, as the Gemara explains, you're not allowed to be makdish something on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Why not? Why can't you makdish something on Shabbos and Yom Tov? What? So it's not tikkun. It's not tikkun. Yeah, for some reason. The reason is because you might come to write it down. You write down, it's a transaction kind of, it's a similar to a transaction. So if you're not allowed to be makdish and Yom Tov. Here came along, Rabbi Yochanan is mechadesh that you're allowed to. Why? The nice thing is because the Gemara goes a long way around about it, but the simple explanation is because it's tzirach of Shabbos and Yom Tov, because you need to be in the Korban Pesach. So you have very little choice about it. The Gemara says, B'sayeli. Mishnah. I come to the shepherd on the Pesach and I say to him, "Oi, I never managed to get a sheep. Can I take one of your sheep?" And he says, "Yes, if you leave me your coat." And then I take the Korban Pesach. Now the halacha is you can't bring a Korban to Beis Hamikdash until you makdish it. So obviously our Mishnah clearly states that one is allowed to makdish Korban Pesach and bring it in. So Moses says no. We're talking not in a case where I go to a shepherd and ask him for a sheep. We had one person arrange the Korban Pesach. Somebody came along, arranged, well, 15 people join me for Korban Pesach. 15 people join, and now I come on El Pesach, and I realize I haven't joined with anybody. So I go to somebody who's arranging it, and I say to him, will you let me join in? So he'll say, okay, I don't mind you joining in. But the problem is that Korban Pesach costs us £100. If you join in, it's going to cost. So leave your coat, and then we'll make a cheshbon after Shabbos. So then you don't have the chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan. What was Rabbi Yochanan's chiddush? They have to be makdish. Here, the Korban Pesach is already kaddish. The only question is, am I part of that Korban Pesach or not part of the Korban Pesach? So you've got no right to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says you have to be makdish. We want to bring a right from our Mishnah. We've got Korban Pesach and El Pesach. One says you've got no right. Could be very well that we're talking about Korban Pesach, which is already kaddish. And the only thing I'm doing now is just adding on to Korban Pesach, which is already Kadosh. Says the Gemara, V'anon Tanan, Ein Nimnin ala behema b'tchila b'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to join in on Yom Tov. You can't say to a few people, you know what, on Yom Tov, let me join in. Because it's also a kind of transaction. People will start writing down, etc. Over here, we're talking about a situation where every single year I'm one of the group. And what happened was, I haven't yet gone around speaking to you about it. So therefore, now I come to you on Erev Pesach and I say to you, remember, like the past 5 years, I've always been one of the group. I want to be part of the group. So that's not considered adding to the group. So the Gemara made the whole Kimta in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is not talking about somebody who never had Korban Pesach. He had a Korban Pesach, already Kadosh, and there was a group, not only joining the group, and it's a group that I've already been joining in the past, and that's why it's permitted. That we've got no right to our Mishnah. Now the Mishnah says before that you go to a shepherd, that you're very regular customer, and you say to him, today is Shabbos, and I need a Korban Pesach. Will you give it to me? So you see that you can. The shepherd knows that you come to him every single year. So what happens is he already sets aside for your Korban Pesach before Erev Pesach. So you're not actually being makdish on Erev Pesach for the sake of Korban Pesach. It's only Kodesh. How can you say that? Well, makdish ketani. The Mishnah Baisa says before that you're allowed to go and be makdish on Erev Pesach. Not like what we just, the Yehuda says you're allowed to. We bring a Baisa that says you're allowed to. We said no. The Baisa is talking about a shepherd that you're already used to and he's ready to be makdish for you. What do you mean? The Baisa is before answers well, no. There's a Shiur mitzvah in order that the owner himself should also say hektish. That means we're talking about the shepherd who's already makdish it for me. As a chashivus, I am also makdish it. That therefore you got no right to Rabbi Yochanan. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan, does Rabbi Yochanan say you're allowed to be makdish an animal on Yom Tov? But Rabbi Yochanan, Stam Mishnah, V'tnan, lo makdishin, you're not allowed to be makdish. Lo ma'avichin, you're not allowed to make an erech. Lo ma'achvim, you're not allowed to make a cherub. Lo ma'akbin to some mices. Kol eile b'Yom Tov, kavachim v'Shabbos, not allowed to some mice, not allowed to be makdish. When it comes to something that you have to bring on Yom Tov, like Korban Pesach and Erev Pesach, or Korban Chagiga, which is a mitzvah to bring on Yom Tov, then you're allowed to be makdish it. But something that you don't need to. For example, I'm going to bring a Korban in a week's time after Pesach. I'm not allowed to on Pesach be makdish it because there's no Teres. You're only allowed to do that which is a chiva, which is kavua for that day. So that's the sugya, that's how we pass it. So if on Shabbos Erev Pesach you find that you haven't got a sheep, you're allowed to be makdish on the Shabbos of Erev Pesach. If, however, you're not going to bring it on Shabbos, you're only going to bring it on the weekday, you're not allowed to stand on Shabbos being makdish. You're not allowed to be makdish something on Shabbos. You have to wait until the weekday to makdish, because it's a kind of purchase, it's a kind of buying and selling, which we don't allow on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah, a person is allowed to count out how many guests he's going to have and how many portions of food he's going to have from his mouth. You can't read it out of a list. Here we're going to the sugya of not reading on Shabbos. Mishnah says you're not allowed to read your list, your menu list. You're not allowed to read your guest list on Shabbos. New halacha. You're allowed to make a lottery. Let's say your wife brings in Friday night, and everybody says, I want that leg, I want that leg, I want that piece, I want that piece of kugel, I want that piece of kugel. You're allowed to make a lottery Shabbos Friday night, and each child is say, right, you'll get this, you'll get that. We'll make a lottery. You're allowed to. You're not allowed to do a lottery where one person gets a big piece and one person gets a small piece. We'll more discuss it in greater detail. They would have the same thing in the Beis Hamikdash. Every day they would want to give out korbanos. So they would split up the korbanos. The Kohanim were all very eager. And the Yerushalmi says they were so eager that sometimes they would get into fights. So therefore, in order to smoothen out the system, you were allowed to make lotteries in the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos that everybody can choose their piece. Avalei ala monos, but not on portions. The Gemara explains how can that possibly be. Just said you're allowed to. What does it mean avalei ala monos, not on portions? The Gemara discusses that. So again, the Mishnah really has two separate topics. One topic is the issue of reading. That you're not allowed to read your guest list or your menu list from a piece of paper. The second half of the Mishnah discusses making notaries. So now the Gemara first discusses the first one. So the Gemara says like this, top of Kuf Mem Tes Amud Aleph. My Tama, why are you not allowed to read your menu list on Shabbos? What will happen is, you'll see that you've got too many guests, so you'll decide to rub one out, and that way to tell a messenger, don't invite all the people, there's too many people on the list. That if you will start reading your guest list, you'll come to start reading other documents which are forbidden to be read on Shabbos. So there's two reasons why we do not read your menu list on Shabbos. One is because you might come to delete. Another reason is because you might come to read Shtoya Diotis which are forbidden to be read on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And the Gemara is going to go for a long time to try and work out what is the difference. It's quite complicated. It's a cheshbon Gemara, but many things keep track. You've got two separate reasons why you're not allowed to read a menu on Shabbos. One, you might come to delete. Guess this. You might not come to delete, or you may come to read something which is forbidden. My benai. Ike benai, the cost of our mitli. It's written on the ceiling, or very high wall. So what's an afkimina? Oh, you can't delete. Very good. It's impossible to rub it out. Once you read the writing on the wall, you might come to read your bank statements. The one who's choishes, you might come to delete. He should also, why does he not hold the problem? Let's say it's written on the wall. Okay, can't delete it. But if you allow him to read on the wall, he'll come to read his bank statements, and that's forbidden. We have a principle that, we had it earlier, second page, you're not allowed to read by the light of a candle. Why? Why not allowed to read by the light of a candle? Anybody remember? You might tilt it and then make the candle go brighter. Came along, Rabbi, and told us that even if the candle is 2 stories high, or even 10 stories high, you're not allowed to read by the light of the candle. What's the spore? Why not? It's called low plug. Chazal, when they made the takana, they didn't start differentiating, splitting hairs, because otherwise the whole takana gets lost. They said you're not allowed to, you're not allowed to. So according to that logic, if it's written as 20 on the top of the Twin Towers, we still should be choshesh, you might come to rub it out, especially once the Twin Towers are so low. But the point is, if you say the problem is you might come to delete it, who cares how high it is? So says the more furthermore, not allowed to read the light of the candle. Maldois is the whip which they used to use to lead the cows when they would plow. Even 10 houses on top of each other, so you're not allowed to read from a candle. So if you're not allowed to read from a candle which is very high, you shouldn't be allowed to read from a writing which is very high up on the wall. So don't tell me the chiluk is when it's written high up on the wall, because that would also be a problem. So the Gemara says, Elo, Ike benayu, the nafkimina between these two reasons, whether you might delete it or whether you might read something forbidden, the cost of our koisel or mitzi. You wrote it on the wall below down. The Mandama says you might delete it as chayshina, because let's say it's written over here on the wall, but I don't like it, so I'll come to rub it out. But not if you come to read writing on the wall, then you'll come to read your bank statements. Why? A person doesn't confuse walls to documents. And that is a different kind of thing. And therefore, if we allow you to read on the wall, you won't come to mix up to write in your document. If according to the you might come to read, which we that you might come to rub out. And therefore, why should you be allowed to read it on the wall? It is true you won't come to read your bank statements, but you may come to rub it out. Elo Ike Benai says a different afternoon. The chayik ativ of a pinkus, that it's engraved inside a ledger or a document. It's engraved. Now, when something is engraved, to rub it out requires tremendous effort. Now, Chazal always understood that a person might forget for a moment or two it is Shabbos. A person is never going to forget for a long, long time. So once it's engraved, you're not going to stop rubbing it out, because to rub out an engraved document is very difficult. You might come to read the Gemara again. So, okay, when it's engraved, you're going to have a problem of rubbing it out. Why not? Because it's very difficult to rub it out. But let's be choshesh that you might come to read something which you're not allowed to. And if you'll say to me, that person will never get mixed up between an engraved ledger and his bank statements. The person won't get mixed up. If we allow a person to read his engraved documents, he won't come to start reading other things. But Tanya, Rabbi Bryce says clearly not like that. Sometimes you'd have important guests and less important guests. The important guests you'd bring into the house, the less important guests you'd leave in the garden. So you're allowed to work out on Shabbos, I'm going to have 12 people inside the house and 12 people outside the house. That's okay. When you're even allowed to start making calculations how many courses is going to be for every person. But only only from writing on the wall, but not on writing which is on the ledger. And then we'll try to establish what's the price of talking about. That's written in ink. What difference does it make if it's written on the wall or if it's written on the ledger? If it's written in ink, then the problem is you might come delete it on the wall, you might come delete it on the ledger. So why should it be permitted on the wall and forbidden on the ledger? It doesn't make any sense. Elo lav techai. Must be talking about what's engraved. And therefore, when it's engraved in the wall, nobody will start coming to delete it. But when it's engraved in a ledger, people might confuse it and start reading it on another document. So it is true they might not come to delete, but once you allow them to read in a ledger which is engraved, they might come to read the bank statements. So you're allowed to. You're not allowed to read it from writing on a ledger. The Gemara goes back to the very first nafkamina. What was the first nafkamina? That you wrote it on the wall very high. And we explained that there's no chashash that you might come to delete. Why? Because it's very high. And what did the Gemara ask? That? Oh, very good. It should be different from the candlelight. That Rabbi told us that when Chazal make a gzeira, they said no plug. And once there's a gzeira, it makes no difference how high. So if that's the case, it makes no difference how on the wall. It says the Gemara, this halacha of Rabbi is not accepted by all. And in fact, it's a machlokas. This low plug, very good. This low plug is a machlokas. Not everybody agrees with this low plug. Says the Gemara, or the kakashaloch, the Rabbi. You asked me a question from Rabbi that said that even 10 stories high, you can't let you read a candle. The Rabbi Tanoihi, the Tanya, a person is allowed to count out his guests and his portion in his mouth. Not from writing. He allows from a wall. That's written low down. It's written very high up. This logic of Rabbi, that once a person writes it high, we should forbid it because you may write it low, and we won't say low plug. No, that's a machlokas tanoim. That means the concept that when Chazal made a gzeira for a specific reason, they made it in all cases, even when the reason doesn't apply, that is a machlokas. It says more, this question, Kani Tanoim is exactly the same question, Tanya. In Roy B'mar b'Shabbos, you shouldn't look in the mirror on Shabbos. Interesting to look in Rashi. In Roy B'mar, says Rashi in French, mirror. Rashi uses the word mirror inside to say, so Rashi uses the word mirror. You shouldn't use a mirror. You know, for the Israelis who only speak English, that word in Rashi won't help them. If you look in Rashi, Rashi says mirror. You're not allowed to look in a mirror on Shabbos. And the Shmuel asks, are you allowed to look in a mirror on a weekday? And I say it is it's what's the word for it? The silbash. The Shmuel says that depends how long you look for. If you look intently, it's indeed a silbash. But just to have a quick glance to see how you look. Okay. But Rameir allows you to look at a mirror if the mirror is attached to the wall. It says, well, what's the logic that it should be different if the wall mirror is attached to the wall? Why? By the time you get around, what's the problem looking into a mirror on Shabbos? That what happens, you'll see you've got white hairs or hair which is out of place. You'll go and get yourself a pair of scissors and cut it off. So that's goizers. So therefore, it didn't allow you to look at the mirror. So why would Rameir allow you the mirror attached to the wall? That by the time you go and look for a pair of scissors, you'll remember. Either way, whether it's attached to the wall or not, by the time you find a pair of scissors, you'll remember it's Shabbos. We're talking about a mirror which is made out of metal. A sharp piece of metal can serve as a dual purpose. It can serve as a mirror and as a pair of scissors, because if it's very sharp, you can just cut your hair. So therefore, one man Doma says we don't allow you to use a mirror, any mirror, because since a mirror which is made out of metal, you can use to cut, and then you'll forget that it's Shabbos, you'll be able to go. So therefore, they said low plug like Rabbi, that even if it's attached to the wall, and when it's attached to the wall, you can't use it to cut your beard, because when it's attached to the wall, it doesn't cut. Nevertheless, Chazal said low plug. Once we forbid in one case, we forbid it in all cases. And the Rameir says, no, we don't say lo plug. A mirror which is attached to the wall, since you can't possibly cut with it, therefore it's okay. A mirror which is a handheld mirror which you can use to cut, that we forbade. So Gemara says like this. We're talking about a mirror made out of metal. So why is a metal mirror forbidden? You might cut off pieces of skin and pieces of hair. And that is only applicable by a detachable mirror, not by a permanent mirror. So therefore we see, but Rameir doesn't agree with that. So Rameir says only detachable mirrors forbidden. So this logical rabba that we say, lo plug, is machlikas tanoim. Machlikas tanoim both by mirrors and also by writing. Writing very high up. If you're choshesh for rubbing out, one man says you're choshesh, one says you're not choshesh because it's so high up, who's going to get there? Or at the Chazal don't say lo plug. One man says we do say lo plug. And the same thing by mirrors. Do we say lo plug or not? Writing underneath an image. And underneath graven images. What's the word for it? Statues. Also the Kroisa b'Shabbos. That yukna atzmaf b'chol also the stakab bo yishnu look at it to the weekday mishum shenema al tifnu le'olidim. Ma'ay tamud loima. Omam cholan al tifnu el midatchem. Don't turn to something which you made up in your mind. That means elilim can be from the word chalolim. Aleph and ches can sometimes get mixed up. So elilim is chalolim. Cholol is hollow. What's hollow? The heart is hollow. There's things which a person makes up in the image in his heart. Things which a person imagines in his heart, one should not stray after them, and one should not look at a graven image. So look at Tesis. Otherwise, this problem, because you can't go around, if you ever go around Buckingham Palace, there's loads of statues there. It's the second one to Tesis. If it's just for beauty, the statues which made for beauty, it's okay. The Gemara says, now there was once a tzaddik, and they called him a child of God, a holy son, a holy child. Says, what was holy about him? He never looked at any images. Now, if you're holding never allowed to look at images, what's so holy about him? He was just keeping the halacha. The answer is that it's a chumrah not to look at any statue. Any statue whatsoever, it's a chumrah not to look at. The one which is made for Avodah Zarah, it's actually forbidden to look at. Okay. Now we're finished with the first half of the Mishnah, which discusses reading. Now we're going to the second half of the Mishnah, which discusses making lotteries. Meifis Adam in Bana v'chul. You're allowed to make a lottery with your children Friday night. Who gets which piece of kugel? In Bana v'mneisei en v'm'acheloi. You're allowed to make with your family, but not with a stranger. My time. Generally speaking, Rashi says this in Bava Metzia, but over here it's very mekatzer. Generally speaking, when a group of travelers travel together, they become loose and easygoing about each other's things. You have one slice of bread, I have two, tomorrow I'll have two, you'll have one. We're not very, very careful about how much sips of water we have. Every so often you get a group of people that are traveling together and they are exact with each other. They're very, very yekish, not one penny more, not one penny less. The Gemara now establishes that that kind of behavior can bring all kinds of isur. They can be over. Taste a long taste over here, which explains very nicely. What taste goes all over the page. It doesn't mean over, they will be over, but they can be over. Mishum midah. The halacha is not allowed to measure on Shabbos. Now, normally, if I say to you, can I have a slice of bread? You will not measure on Shabbos how much you give it to me, because you say, I'll give you a slice of bread, and after Shabbos, I'll give you back a slice of bread. But these kinds of people, they're likely to measure, and therefore they have to be careful that they shouldn't measure. Mishum mishka, they're likely to weigh it to get the exact amount to pay back. Mishum minyan. Minyan is more complicated, it's like this. You're allowed to say to me, I'm allowed to say to you, can I have 12 eggs on Shabbos? You're allowed to say that. I'm not allowed to say to you on Shabbos, look, I borrowed off you 20 eggs during the week. Can I have another 12? Make it now that I owe you 32. Why not? It's too business-minded. I mean, I'm allowed to ask you for a number now, but I'm not allowed to ask you for a number and then use it to make a calculation. These kinds of people, because they're so makbid, are very likely to come to a number. They're likely to be over on the Issa of borrowing on Yom Tov. Why? Tesis explains that even though Chazal said you're allowed to borrow on Yom Tov, we had our Mishnah, the last, not when we had in Shabbos, you're allowed to borrow on Yom Tov. But that was only if you use the expression hashileni. These kinds of people that are very, very yekish, they don't want to use the word hashileni because they're scared that somebody will not feel an obligation to pay it back and not straight away. So they want to use halveni. So they could end up being over the issa of borrowing on non-tov. Go from test of this. They could even be because of vibis. That means normally we pass that if it's a small measure, that means we said already on Shabbos, if I borrow from you a packet of sugar and I give you back a packet of sugar, there could be a problem of vibis. What could the problem of vibis be? Packet of sugar might go up. We passed them that with a small measure, we're not choishish. That means if it's a huge amount, 100 kilo of sugar, fine. But one packet of sugar is not a problem. We're allowed to borrow from you packet of sugar and give it back to you. Why? Because the small differences is not a person is moich. But when people are makpid, that means let's say you're the kind of person that indeed cares about such things, then you're not even allowed to borrow a packet of sugar. I think that's what we said. Yes, that is an issue, major issue at the auction. The Mishnah Berurah says that since it is tzorchei mitzvah, we're matted. That means it is mekach and memkeh b'Shabbos, but we allow it to tzorch mitzvah because it brings in money from the shuk. It is a business. So again, so now let's get it clear. So allowed to make a lottery. Mishnah Berurah actually says that those who are machmir don't. And I was once in the reserve left. I used to spend it on, and somebody came to me and said they're starting a new minyan, and he wanted to know should they make auction aliyahs. He said, no, if you can manage, the shul can manage without auctioning aliyahs, don't. And the person said, and eventually the person said that no, the shul won't manage. He really wanted himself left to say that it's okay. Like many people. So first he asked him, is it okay? And then afterwards, did the auction even be sold? He said, nice, if a shul needs it, you got the you meant to buy aliyahs, we meant to auction it before. It's strange. Nice, Mishmor says people do it, everybody does. The point is, you're supposed to do it. It's mutter, it's tzorch mitzvah. Oh. Okay. So again, no, it doesn't work the same because then people won't give the same, not the same excitement. Yeah, okay, actually the shyness has come off. Okay. The Mishnah says you're allowed to make a lottery with your children. So Friday night, one child says, I want that piece of cookie, one says, I want that piece of cookie, you're allowed to. But with a stranger, let's say we're all eating together Friday night, and we're the kind of people that are very yakish, we're not allowed to make a lottery to decide who should get what. Says the Gemara, whenever we talk about the Mishnah, it says one person yes, one person not. We obviously talk about the same kind of people. So Mishnah says family yes, strangers not. If we talk about these kinds of people, one of the say Nami, you shouldn't be allowed to do with the children either because you've got the same problem. Says well, no. One of the base and we time could have you the marab. Don't have you the marab. Mutal harvest. One of the base bevibis. Gederatim on time of vibis. That he says you're allowed to lend your children with vibis in order they should taste how bitter vibis feels. Now, glad that we don't pass like this. The Gemara over here doesn't tell us about that. The Gemara would see in Ezu Neshech tells us we don't pass like this. But the logic of that Gemara is like this. We're talking about a father that's supporting all of his children. And all the money is his. Since all the money is his, therefore there's no issa deraisa of ribis because the truth of the matter is it's taken from one pocket to another pocket. Only so therefore you're allowed to lend your children with ribis. Say to them, I'm giving you £100 if you're back 110, even though the 110 is also coming back from you. The Gemara says you shouldn't do it because once a person gets into the habit of ribis, it's very hard to get out of it. So the Gemara says like this. In our Mishnah, which is allowed to do a lot of it, is talking about family members where it all belongs to one person, so you're allowed to. And when it says you're not allowed to, it's talking about people that care. Very the Gemara. The idea of ribis is they should taste how bitter ribis is. No, they have to pay you back. You lend your child £100, and you tell them pay me back 110 in order that they should see how bad it is. And not lend themselves for ribis. That's right. That's it. They will realize it's not worth it. They will realize how not nice it is to other people. That's the right. Then when they lend, they'll realize how not nice it was that they had to pay back you 110. They won't do it to others. Mishnah says you're not allowed to do a big portion to a small portion. Not allowed to do a lottery of a big portion to a small portion. Why not? If we talk about it all belonging to the same purse, so what if it's to make a big portion? Well, it says now changes the wording of our Mishnah. the understanding of our Mishnah. My time David Marav, like Yehuda Marav says, that you're even allowed to do ribbis. Why? Because in the end of the day, it's all yours. And since it's all yours, so therefore you're not actually doing anything wrong. But in but with other people, you're not allowed to, even the same portion. That means even if it's going to be the same size piece, you're still not allowed to. Because since they're makbid, they're going to measure the kugel to check that each piece is exact. So therefore, even if it's about the same, it's still forbidden. That again, my tamak David Shmuel, that people will measure. Because it's a kind of stealing. Again, the Mishnah is telling us 3 separate halachas. With your immediate family, when you're paying for everything yourself, you're allowed to do a lottery, even a big portion to a small portion. Why? Because at the end of the day, there's no mekach memka because it's all yours. With strangers, even not big against small, even equal portions you're not allowed to. Why not allowed to? Because since we're talking about people that care deeply about these things, they'll come to measure and weigh and to check afterwards if the pieces were fair. So we don't allow it. But a weekday, you would be allowed to. Why would you be allowed to a weekday? Because at the end of the day, it's not a gambling. Because it's all about the same portion. So let's say the two of us own the shutfus of kugel, and we want to split it, and we try and cut it halfway, and now we've got an argument who should get which half of the kugel. We're allowed to do a lottery because that's not gambling. But if it's a big portion versus a small portion, that means somehow one person got a very big piece, one person got a small piece, and now want to establish who should get what, then even in a weekday you're not allowed to, because that's kubya. That is the same as gambling. What's the problem with gambling? Rashi explains that what will happen is like this. You will say to me that if you get, say, the dice comes to a 6, you can have it. And then afterwards, when it comes to it, you will be reluctant to give it. It was an asmachta. Asmachta meaning you didn't really mean it. So therefore, when you've given it to me, it's a form of theft because really you never wanted me to have it. So Mishnah is teaching us, with your immediate family, even a big against small, you're allowed to, because at the end of the day, we're talking about where it all belongs to you. With the strangers, you're not allowed to, on Shabbos, equal portions, because you might come to measure and weigh. But during the weekday, you're allowed to do a lottery if it's equal measures. But on a weekday, you're not allowed to do big against small. Why not allowed to do big against small? Because it's a form of gambling, and that's forbidden. That. Says the Mishnah, you're allowed to make lotteries, etc., on the pieces of the base of Mikdash. What does it mean not on portions? Just said you're allowed to. You're not allowed to do weekday portions on Yom Tov. Pshita, obviously. That Kohanim are very quarrelsome. Did you hear this? Kohanim are very quarrelsome. And they used to fight bitterly about who gets which portion. So you might have thought that since they fight so much, even the meat that's left over from before Yom Tov, and they haven't yet had a chance to divide it up, we should allow them to do lotteries just to be able to avoid the machlekas and they should eat them in the kavanas. Says the Gemara, no. Not. Why not? Why don't we allow them to avoid the problem? If they've got meat left over from before Yom Tov, let them do a lottery to avoid all fights. They shouldn't have explained because they should have done it before Yom Tov. Why did they wait till Yom Tov? You're not allowed to sort out in Yom Tov issues that you could have sorted out before, and therefore they should have done a lottery before Yom Tov to divide out the portions. Now that we mentioned this man, Yaakov, his father wasn't a tzaddik, his father was a Rasha, so we don't mention his father's name, only his mother's name. So now we're going to say other things about him. He said, if a person's friend is punished because of him, this Gemara gives me a lot of shadows. That means it's a very hard Gemara to accept. Let's say somebody's very, very nasty to you, and you daven to Hashem that person should suffer, and Hashem answers your tefillah, and that person suffers, you lose Gan Eden because of it. Can you imagine such a thing? Because at the end of the day, a person should daven. They should truly shouldn't daven that other people should suffer because of you. There is a shach that says that if the person is causing you harm and you've got no way of stopping him and no basin that can help you, then you're allowed to daven to Hashem. Yitzchak Berkowitz brings it in the Sefer Mishpatei HaShalom. So I was quite happy to see it there that sometimes there are cases you're allowed. Okay. Minolam. Where do we see this idea? There was a terrible Rosh called Achov. Achov killed his neighbor Nevoyos. Why did he kill him? Does anybody know? He wanted his vineyard. He had a field. Next to the field was a beautiful vineyard. He wanted the vineyard, and he tried to buy it off, and the fellow refused to sell it to him, so he had him killed. Achov once wanted to go to war, and he had a lot of Nevi'ei Sheker, a lot of false prophets. He asked 400 false prophets, should I go to war? And what did they all say to him? Go to war and you'll win. And eventually there was one Navi Emes who said to him, go to war and you should go to war, you'll die. In fact, he went to war and he was killed. Now, why did 400 Nevi'im all say false? So the Chazal tell us that what happened was there was a beast in Shalmal and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was passing what to do. And he says like this, Hashem said, who will seduce Achov and convince him to go to war? They should go and die in Umm Gilad. Each malach came up with another idea of how to get Achov to go to war and die. A spirit came and stood in front of Hashem. I will go. And he said, I will be a false spirit in the mouth of all Nevi'im. Hashem said to him, go, you will succeed, but go out and do so. We said, what was this spirit? That was the ruach, the spirit of the voice. The voice was dead. His neshama, so to speak, went to Hashem and spoke to him. Or might say, why did Hashem say to him, go and do it? Hashem said to the voice, okay, you can go and convince Achov to die in battle, meaning go convince him to go to war, and then he should die, but you should know that you will leave my presence. Maybe the reason was because of the fact that he was a liar. That means Nevoyos did two things. He convinced Achov to go to war and to die there. And plus he lied to Achov, telling him that you're going to win, and he really lost, he died. So maybe that's why you've got no right that somebody who causes harm to his friend will lose the presence of Hashem. The more over here brings many psukim to darshan about Nebuchadnezzar. And it's a bit disjointed to say, tell you back. Nebuchadnezzar was a terrible, terrible, terrible Rasha and a very, very powerful man. And he conquered many countries and used to sodomize different kings at different days, and he used to do lotteries each day to choose who he should sodomize that day. He once tried to do it to Tzidkiyahu, who was a big tzaddik, and that day Hashem made his olah go to be 300 amos long. And it became so long that he was unable to do anything with it, and therefore that day he didn't succeed. So now the Gemara brings a few psukim, and it's hard to translate each. It's also like this. So the simple explanation is that the Nebuchadnezzar would get more pleasure from humiliating the kings than from their honor of winning in battle. That's what a Rosh was. The Gemara says a different Rosh. The Gemara says, drink the poison, you, and the oral is referring to Tzidkiyahu. We want to explain why it's referring to Tzidkiyahu. That you got satisfaction from disgrace, meaning that you got pleasure from humiliating the kings. That's referred to Nebuchadnezzar. Drink the poison, you and the oral. That's Tzidkiyahu Melech. That what happened was, in the course of Nebuchadnezzar trying to sodomize and rape him, he ended up getting himself embarrassed and suffering. And we see that Tzidkiyahu, so to speak, on some level is criticized. Says, well, no, that can't be. First of all, the whole pasuk is referring to Nebuchadnezzar, that the Gemara means like this. Rashi explains that, say, Ato v'ha'oral does mean you and the oral. Ato you v'ha'oral and become an oral, meaning that you'll suffer the embarrassment of being somebody. The oral can be a noun, it can be a verb. In the Havamin, Rashi points this out. It's a bit. In the beginning, the Gemara thought it was a noun, you and the oral. Now the Gemara says, no, you and become an oral, meaning that your oral should stretch. So first of all, the pasuk is about Nebuchadnezzar. He was actually a tzaddik. It wasn't his fault. Nebuchadnezzar was at fault. The Gemara brings only the first half of the Gemara, which is more later brings the whole thing. Where the Gemara explains that Nebuchadnezzar did it from his own volition, and Tzidkiyahu did nothing wrong. The Mekur, that a person who does punishment for other people suffers, is from this pasuk. Causing a tzaddik to suffer is not good. For a tzaddik to cause punishment, it's not good. If it's not good, it's bad. Hashem doesn't want to have evil and harm amongst him. Hashem doesn't have in his dwelling place bad. So a person who causes others to suffer is considered bad, and Hashem doesn't want to have him in his presence. How do you know the word chaloshim means a lottery? How did you fall from the heavens? This pasuk is also referring to Nebuchadnezzar, that he eventually died and he fell from his very powerful position. Hillel ben Shocha. Hillel is the one who glorified himself, who compared himself to the dawn. Nigdata la'oretz, who were cut down to the land. Chodesh al goyim v'goyim, the one who did a lottery on nations. Omar Abba Baba Charuna, but Lamed Shematel Pur. But Nebuchadnezzar would do a lottery every day. Gedolei Malchus, on all the powerful kings. Leida Eze ben Yomish Mishkav Zochar. Which day was the Mishkav Zochar for which particular king? That when Nebuchadnezzar died, everybody felt a sense of honor. Why did they all feel a sense of honor? They felt their honor came back to them, no longer were they being sodomized by Nebuchadnezzar. Rashi there tells a different pshat, is that even though most kings, when they die, get an honorable kavur, Nebuchadnezzar did not. And therefore the kings felt, the dead kings felt the satisfaction that they got a good kavur, not him. While Nebuchadnezzar was alive, nobody ever laughed. He was such a terrible king. I was doing this Gemara that Mamish reminds me of Stalin and Machshamoy, that he caused such fear in the country that when he was around, people found it hard to be cheerful. While Nebuchadnezzar was alive, there was no cheer. When the land settled, everybody rejoiced. There was no rejoicing. Not allowed to stand in the house of Nebuchadnezzar. There's a lot of shadim living in his house. When that Rosh Nebuchadnezzar tried to do to the Tzadik Tzidkiyo that act of Mishkav Zochar, it went around the entire feast. He used to have a very big feast every day with Nebuchadnezzar, and suddenly his order became so long that it went around the entire room. Stay out of Gamot, the Gematria Ayin is 70, Resh 200, Lamed is 30. So the oval, as we said, according to this pshat, the Gemara is saying it's a verb, become an oval. An oval, meaning you should have an oval of 300 amas long. When Nebuchadnezzar went down to Gehenna, all the people in Gehenna got nervous. They got scared, and Nebuchadnezzar came to Gehenna, and they got scared that he would become the king over them. He was such a terrible, powerful man. Or they said maybe he's going to get no well like them. Maybe he's going to suffer like them. That you have become ill like us. Maybe alternatively you want to become a ruler over us. Do you think yourself to be so beautiful? Go and sleep and be with the people who are Rishoim. Meaning that Nebuchadnezzar was to be with all the other Rishoim. That when he died, so then Noigesh, that's the oppressor, stopped, cancelled. Shavas means it finished. Shavsu Madheva, all Madheva was cancelled, was suppressed. What's Madheva? This nation I used to say, topic from the Bava, which was a very powerful kingdom, would say, measure your gold and bring it, measure your gold and bring it. That bring and bring without measure. When Nebuchadnezzar died, the power of Babel became weaker. So then, Shovsom Madheva. Madheva is a reference to Babel that used to constantly tell people, bring me more and more, measure out and bring me your wealth. And the Pasuk says about Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar boasted that tremendous power, extra power you've given me. What was the extra power Nebuchadnezzar had? He used to ride on a male lion, which was particularly vicious. But instead of riding on a donkey like most people on a horse, he used to ride on a male lion. He tied a snake around his head. So some of us explain that he tied a snake as a turban. Others, Rashi including, says that instead of using a leash like most people, or what's called a rope, a lead, he used a serpent as a lead to hold on to the lion. That Nebuchadnezzar was so powerful that even the animals were forced to serve him. I have to carry on because the cheshbon that I have is we need to do more. I'm sorry that we're going so far, but there is certain matters about it. First of all, it's easy gemors, and also there is a big cheshbon that to finish, so we should be able to have a proper simon. Once it's not that Shabbos, you won't be able to have a proper simon. So this is, says the Mishnah. You're not allowed to employ workers on Shabbos. If I want to get a worker, I can't say to a friend of mine, hire workers on Shabbos. So you're not allowed to hire yourself workers on Shabbos, and you're not allowed to ask somebody else to hire workers on Shabbos. You're not allowed to walk to the tchum in order to employ workers or to bring food. Let's say you live in a little town and you go 2,000 amas, that's the end of the tchum. So you want to walk to the end of the tchum in order that Motzei Shabbos immediately you should be able to find goyim to do your job or anybody to do your job or to start harvesting. You're not allowed to go to the end of the tchum to do that. You're allowed to go to the end of the tchum to guard. This is quite a complicated halacha. We're talking about, I own a field which is far out of the tchum. It's miles out of the tchum. So now I'm not allowed to walk there on Shabbos. But guarding a field is actually permitted on Shabbos. Why is guarding a field permitted on Shabbos? Because it doesn't involve a malacha. So therefore, because the actual act of guarding the field is forbidden, is permitted, I'm allowed to walk and stand at the end of the 2,000 amas in order that I should then be able to walk further and then guard my field. What's the difference? Can anybody tell me the difference? Why am I not allowed to stand at the end of the tchum to employ workers, yet I'm allowed to stand at the end of the tchum to go and guard my field? Because? Why not? You're going to the end of the tchum in order to then go and look after your field, which is past the tchum. You're not, because the field is past the tchum. Oh, if your field theoretically possible, you could do this on Shabbos. Let's say you made the Eruv Techumin, or let's say you did, it's not something which was 100% forbidden. Again, let's say I want to go to Gateshead for during the week. Am I allowed to start walking on Shabbos to get to Gateshead, to start walking? Mutter or Asa, what would you pass him? Are you allowed to start walking on Shabbos? No, you're allowed to. That's the Chiddush in our Mishnah. Why? Theoretically, it is possible to walk to Gateshead without a problem. If there'd be houses, the whole way would be permitted. Am I allowed to walk on Shabbos towards out of the tchum in order to employ a worker? No, because that's impossible for it to be mutter. So you're allowed to walk to the edge of the tchum to guard your food, even though guarding your food requires you to go out of the tchum. You're not allowed to walk out of the tchum on Shabbos. That's not what we're saying. But you're allowed to start walking on Shabbos to do something Motzei Shabbos which is forbidden, if that thing in theory would be possible. Masha'inkin, to do other things like employing workers is forbidden. Okay, we'll discuss it more later because it does come in again. Or maybe first be ordered to bring the food home. Whatever I'm allowed to do, I'm allowed to walk on Shabbos to do. That means whatever I'm allowed to say, I'm allowed to start walking on Shabbos to start preparing myself. So Mishnah starts off saying that you're not allowed to employ workers, you're not allowed to ask a Yiddish friend to employ workers. What difference would it be to asking me? Let's say I'm not allowed to ask a guy on Shabbos to hoover my house. I'm allowed to, the Mishnah says, I'm not allowed to ask my friend, a Yiddish neighbor to ask. What's the Chiddush? Why should it be different for him? Says the Gemara, we're talking about asking a non-Jewish friend. That means, the Mishnah is telling you, you're not allowed to ask a guy to ask another guy to do malach. We already know that you're not allowed to tell a guy to do malacha. So what's the chiddush of our Mishnah? The Mishnah starts off, you're not allowed to employ workers, and not allowed to ask a friend. A Yiddish friend, of course, is possible. A Goyish friend, that's a miolakum. A miolakum, everybody knows it's also. That means, Rav Ashi understands that the Mishnah is actually telling us something which is completely spare. It's superfluous. Only the Mishnah tells it to us in order to deduce another halacha. And the Mishnah is saying to you, don't employ a worker using direct language. The indirect language you may. And the fact that the Mishnah uses an expression which is spare, which we don't need, teaches us this halacha that you're allowed to use indirect language. How? So more explains like this. Not allowed to say employ. You're allowed to say, let's say, for example, both of us know that I need a job done Motzei Shabbos. Let's say you work in a specified, I don't know, you do a high tech, right? I need new cameras installed. So I come up to you on Shabbos to say to you, do you imagine, are you thinking, is there a chance that you'll come to me Motzei Shabbos? Now, I know and you know that what I'm asking you to do is to come to me Motzei Shabbos and to work. But did I say anything about coming on Shabbos? I didn't. And the chiddush of the Mishnah is that's permitted. And the Gemara says, are we going to, will I see you tonight? You're not allowed to. You're allowed to say to your friend, I'm not going to see you tonight, because since you've not clearly said anything, it is mutter. And we actually pass it like this, as long as you don't say anything which is clearly a malacha, even though it is self-understood, it is mutter. And that's why you've got the funny stories of somebody saying, the Shabbos Geret, I've got a car to sell. By the time he gets the Shabbos Munach, he says, the Shabbos Geret, the car is sold. The Maisa will see again and again that it's not lechatchila. We're not discussing this, what should do. That story would be completely incorrect, because that's clearly saying what you want to do. But if you say something which you can understand something, it is mutter. The reason is because you're not allowed to say, you're allowed to think. And therefore, if everything which I've said could be understood completely kosher b'yosha, I come to you and I say to you, would you pop in tomorrow? And everybody around would think to themselves, I'm asking you to visit me for tea. The only thing is that between you and me, we understand, because of previous discussions and other reasons, that what I actually mean is till you come tomorrow to assess my house. So then it is forbidden. So then it's permitted, because only us understand. It's only machshot. We said dovo. Dibu also hiru mutter. What else did we have today? That dovo means dibu. Zedva shmita. That dva dibu of shmita. You have to say on shmita meshametani. So dibu is also hiru mutter. Says the Gemara, Abe hiru lavke dibu domi. Is thinking not like dibu, because we just said that since the Torah says medaber dovo, you're not allowed to talk on Shabbos about business, which is mashma that you're allowed to think about business. So it comes out that you're allowed to think even when you're not allowed to talk. If that's the case, you're not allowed to think in Torah in the bathroom. Why not? You just said to me that when the Torah says dibur, it means only speech. So why can't I think in dibur Torah in the bathroom? It doesn't say dibur. It says that while you think in Torah, you should be kodesh, and not in the bathroom. You don't have that. That the Torah does use the word dovo, that there shouldn't be elbow by dibur. So you see clearly that there is a lashon of elbow. It says, if a goy is undressed, you're not allowed to say shema in front of it. The Rishonim explain, and this is very sadistic. There are two separate isurim regarding Torah. One is, in the bathroom, you're not even allowed to think. But if you're standing in front of somebody completely undressed, you're allowed to think in Torah, you're not allowed to speak Torah. Why? Because it's two separate droshes. One drosh is Voyam Machanecho Kodesh. Your camp has to be Kodesh. If it's not Kodesh, meaning it's a bathroom, then you're not allowed to even think in Torah. The other one, it says V'loyah b'cho elvas. Elvo is a different issue. Elvo, when you see elvo, let's say you're walking around, I don't know, you're going somewhere, and you see people completely undressed. You're allowed to think in learning. You're just not allowed to say learning. And that is how the Gemara answers. Now the Gemara goes on a tangent, but we just mentioned a goy undressed. Why a goy undressed? Or by a yid undressed? Pray the Gemara. Why talk about a goy, even the yid? Someone says, let me boy come up. He was trying to say extra chiddush. You might think that a goy is like a donkey, and a donkey allowed to talk and speak to and think to in front of a donkey which is undressed. So you might have thought that the goy should have the same status. Maybe indeed. Why indeed are you not allowed to say divrei Torah in front of a goy? After all, the Torah does compare them to animals. So if that's the case, you should be allowed to say. And says, you're not allowed to say, the Torah calls Noach Elvo, and Noach was a goy. So you see that by a goy, it's shaykh the Issa Elvo. Let's just summarize. The Gabi Shabbos, it says the word dovo, you're not allowed to say words, but you're allowed to think. And the halacha is, we say it in the song of Shabbos, you're allowed to think. It's not like a tchila, but a person is allowed to think. Because you can say anything you want as long as it's not understood that you're doing halacha. Regarding Elva, there's two different parashas. One parasha, Elva's dovo, which means talking about Torah. That's only if you're looking at Elva, but you're allowed to think in Torah. And another thing, in a bathroom, you're not allowed to think in Torah. He wants to ask Chaim Kanievsky, what's the hardest mitzvah to keep? He said, this is the hardest mitzvah. Not to think in learning when you're in the bathroom. Okay, we did quite a bit today, and tomorrow we'll also do. My son's got a graduation tomorrow based on Talmud. I'm a bit torn. It's starting 8 o'clock. Son said he doesn't really care, but I'm not sure. I have to think about it. Yeah, I'll be in contact. Oh, you'll? What? Finish at 9:15.
I don't mind if you do it 9.
No, I can't do 9:15. The question is, can anybody do it before Mincha?
I can.
You can? Mincha is what time? 7:25, no? Or 7:25. Can anybody come at 6:30 tomorrow? Is that like too much? It's fine for you.
It's better time.
Probably better, yeah.
Yeah, but I can't wait too much.
You can't. Levi, what are you? You can't.
How would that be, sorry?
6:30.
Put the recording on.
Put the recording on. Benny, what about you? 6:30? No good?
I think do the graduation.
Maybe. Andrew?
If you can come and online.
Possibly, or I'll get the recording.
Yehuda, what about you? 6:30 tomorrow. Does that work for you?
I'm straight from work.
Oh, fine. Oh, a second. Yehuda? 6:30 tomorrow.
Yeah, no, it's too early for me.
Too early. Can everybody mind contacting Auditorium, just tell you, see how many people.
Can I just mention something else?
Yes.
I'm not personally. Don't subscribe to the YouTube channel.
Now, anybody wants it, it does get uploaded as soon as possible. But if you want to know, just subscribe, and then it seems. Very good. Okay.
Yehuda's going to make money out of it.
Millions. Okay.
Actually, I put my credit card.
Okay.
I guess 2 or 3 a day. I don't know.